All right, hello everyone. I should be all set up here. Just give me one moment to check a couple of things. I apologize for this. I just want to make sure that things are connected over on my YouTube channel here as I'm streaming. Looks like we are good to go. All right, so hello everyone. My name is Hector Acuna. I'm going to be talking today about one of my portfolios on my website with my studio work. So we're going to be talking about and looking at paintings and some mixed media work that I created in graduate school in my thesis year, my final year of the grad program, and then during the year right after that, candidacy ended. So just before I get started, I did want to share a couple of reminders. The first one is that I have my plein air zine, my third volume. The pre-order for that is still up for the next few weeks. Maybe less than that. It really depends on how productive I can be on designing those pages in the next couple of weeks. So you still have some time to save $5 on a copy of the upcoming zine. This is the cover for the third volume, and obviously the pre-sale continued past January 1st, but I'm keeping the deal sort of open for the time being. And the book is going to be $30 once it's printed, and if you pre-order it now, you can save $5. The other thing about the pre-order window, if you're new to this announcement, is that if you choose to pay for the full price, so $30 plus shipping, your name will be featured in the book as a backer or kind of like a sponsor of the project, and just all around kind of supporter of my paintings and my work. Just to give you a quick look at what these books look like, here is volume 1. So I believe these are 5 by 8.5 inches, and they're like little photo books with some text and process imagery. This is volume 2. It's a lot bigger than volume 1. This is pretty close to the size that volume 3 will end up being. So I just wanted to give you a little preview of what to expect if you decide to pre-order volume 3. These have been really fun to make and share with collectors and with art lovers. They're kind of like mini coffee table books, which is really fun to offer to people. So anyway, if you have questions about the pre-order, shoot me an email. You can contact me right from my website, which is listed here on the screen. The other announcement I had is that, if you're following my practice for the plein air outdoor painting work, make sure you're following me on Instagram, because I will be at an event in Florida later this month in March. And if you want to see what paintings I create, make sure to follow along on Instagram. My Instagram handle for the plein air account is Hector Acuna plein air. And then I also have a studio account for my kind of like surreal figurative work. That is also my name altogether, studio. So anyway, that's pretty much it for the announcements. I'm going to also be sending out a newsletter with some updates and just sort of recapping some recent trips I've been on, and talking a little bit about a series of paintings I just wrapped up for a show that's coming up. If you're not subscribed to my email list, you can go to the contact page of my website and plug in your name and email to get on the list. So sometimes I do like shop coupons and other promos for my email list subscribers. So those are a few reasons why you might want to sign up. I used to do giveaways with prints and just like small process material, stickers, things like that. So I might bring that back at some point here soon as well. Okay, now that we are 5 minutes into the stream, let's go ahead and get to the topic for today. So right on my website here, I'm going to the Portfolio tab. I'm going to click on the Studio image, and then we're going to go into the Archive and talk about the 2020 to 2021 portfolio. Now, again, the reason why it's listed as 2021 to 2020 is because at the top of the page, you're looking at the more recent work in the portfolio that was produced or created in 2021, and then we're going to work our way backwards as we move towards the bottom. So for that reason, I'm going to scroll to the pretty much the bottom of the page, and that's going to bring us to my thesis show work, which is what I'll talk about first. And I think it'll make more sense if I start with some of these images here. All right, so just to give you a little bit of context, if you're tuning into this stream and you missed the second stream that I did where I talked about my 2017 to 2019 portfolio, which is the first 2 years of my MFA experience at Michigan State University in Lansing, Michigan. I talked a little bit about the program in my last stream, but one of the things I really liked and was very grateful for in Michigan State's program is that it's a 3-year program, which unlike a lot of schools, you typically only get 2 years for your MFA, and it's nice to have an extra year to experiment and explore different materials and methods of working, to collaborate with different artists and thinkers, and then also to try out different mediums that maybe you haven't tried. So by your 3rd year, you've had some time to really explore and try out some different things in your studio practice. And on top of that, the other thing that was really nice about going to Michigan State's program is that the department was very research led, which was a great community to be a part of at that time for me, because most of my art practice prior to grad school really didn't incorporate a lot of outside research into topics like anthropology or sociology or psychology or philosophy. And being in school as a grad student gave me a couple of new tools and methods to expand where I was consuming information and creating work from a very informed place, which, without grad school, I think it would have taken me a lot longer to maybe get to that point with my practice. It's hard to say, but my thesis show, which was titled The Barn, you might be able to see some of the text here on the screen. I apologize for some of the images that are in this portfolio. They're not quite as crisp or as clear as I would have liked. I'll talk about why that is later on in the stream today, but I'll just read the wall label text that the curator wrote for the show. So it has my name, my nationality, the year I was born, the title of the show, which is a mixed media installation called The Barn, and obviously it was produced in 2020, so it has the year. And the text says, Hector Acuna creates a world of signs, symbols, and references that draw upon his upbringing as a person of color in the rural Midwest. The artist presents a psychological mapping of different forms of visual culture, from popular imagery, art history, and stereotypical portrayals, all of which swirl around the spaces of his family's former property in rural Wisconsin. The use of the barn specifically, both as a physical structure and an image, delineates a sense of interiority and exteriority as he mines the formation of his own identity. There's plenty of humor and play, but there are also moments of racism and bigotry. Through another person's eyes, how might we see these subtle and not so subtle forms of cultural insensitivity in a different light? So I really appreciated the text that was written for the show. I feel really bad I'm blanking on Stephen's last name. Maybe that'll come to me later. The curator who worked at the Broad, the MSU Broad Museum at that time, that we worked with, his first name is Stephen. All right, let's keep going through the imagery here in the portfolio. So this is the front face of the installation. So in my cohort of my year in the MFA program, there were 3 other artists / students that were in the program. So I shared a very large and generous amount of space with 3 other artists for our group MFA exhibition. And my work, if you came in the gallery and you walked through the gallery doors, you would be able to go to the right or to the left. And my work and my peer Emily Samosky's work were sharing this one gallery to the left. And when you walk in, it would be Emily's work kind of on the walls, her very large collage paintings that she made for her show. Excuse me. And then down the room, you would see the installation that I created, which would look like this. And just to give you a sense of scale, the barn structure here on the left is, I think, 7.5 feet tall, and then it was 15 feet wide and 12 feet deep. And it was built in 6 kind of sections that were all this big arch roof shape. And then there were objects that I created to install inside of the barn. And then, as you'll see, there are some things installed on the outside of the barn as well. And then the painting, which is hanging partially with wires from the ceiling and then bolted into the floor, so it's this freestanding kind of like wall of a painting, is 12 feet tall by 10 feet wide. So just to give you a sense of scale, if I stood next to these 2 objects, my height would come to right about here, if I remember correctly. And then there's a small object behind the painting that we'll look at here shortly. So this is the backside of the installation, and you can kind of see some of Emily's work on the other side of the gallery. So it's a very large gallery space that we had provided to us, which was really, really nice. And it was also part of the reason why I wanted to create such a monumental body of work for my thesis show. I sort of felt like having this much space, is kind of a rare thing, especially early on in your career as an artist. And it's such a beautiful gallery that, I didn't want to feel as though I missed an opportunity to create something that, is harder to exhibit in other spaces that maybe I have access to or would have access to at the time. So that was part of the reason why I wanted to make this very large installation. And so you can see on the back of the painting, there are bits of wood paneling that are installed that cover up the stretcher of the painting. And then there's a very small image that's being shown through a cutout window on the back of the painting that I'll talk about later. And then this is one of the sides of the barn roof. So there's this like corn decorative painted pattern on the roof. And then there are 3 small oil paintings that are framed and installed to look like windows on the barn structure. And then this is the third and small object that I was starting to talk about. It's another, reproduction of this barn image and motif that you see throughout the rest of the show. And that's also why the title of the work is called The Barn, is because we're seeing this particular form of architecture in different mediums, at different scales, from different perspectives. At times you're kind of inside of the barn, at times you're outside of the barn. And over time, it began to take on new metaphors and, meanings as the work progressed, which was really exciting for me as the maker of the project. So just to give you a little bit of context on the initial idea and concept for the work, I remember we had to present with our MFA committee members, faculty members, and the other artists in my cohort to the museum staff. And this was I think in September of 2019, we met with the museum staff for our show that was going to be installed in the spring of 2020. And when I presented my proposal, this is pretty close to what I proposed, which is kind of unusual for me. I tend to have an idea, and by the time a show comes around, everything is sort of morphed 2 or 3 different times, and it's sometimes difficult to see the through line or the thread back to the initial idea, especially formally. I think conceptually things end up kind of where I started from, but formally I usually keep the door pretty wide open to allow things to shift and adjust. But for my thesis show, I knew that this was going to be a project that was going to take a lot of time and had to have a pretty strict schedule throughout the fall, the winter, and then into the early start of the spring in 2020. So I kind of kept to my initial plan. But anyway, I remember I presented the idea to the museum staff, and I said I want this to be kind of a large triptych installation. And at that point, I had small drawings of this barn form and structure, which I'm not going to present my sketchbook renderings in this video, but I will probably do a live stream running through my sketchbook portfolio that's also on my website at some point in the future, and those pages will be in that portfolio. So make a note for that if you want to hang out for future live streams. But anyway, this was kind of the initial idea that I had, and part of the reason I wanted to create an installation that had this shift in scale between different parts was because I was reading from a text called On Longing, and I believe it was called On Longing. Now I'm sort of second guessing myself. I'll have to look this up real quick. But the book was, it was called On Longing, Narratives of the Miniature, where's the full title? The Gigantic and the Collection. And it's a text by the author Susan Stewart. And one of the things I really loved about this book was the way that she talks about our experience through the lens of scale to our surroundings, to our homes, to our memories, to our sense of internal psychological space, and how scale creates a lot of the foundation in our feelings towards those things. So when something is monumental or gigantic, that makes us feel very small and maybe not as in control or as powerful, as opposed to things that are very miniature that could fit in our hands or in our pockets, right? There's this shift in maybe autonomy, or this shift in ability to understand something and to make sense of something. So I liked how in that text she talks about the relationship of the body to space and to forms shifting that sense of scale. So that was kind of the initial framework for my show, was that I wanted to take a particular image or motif and push its sense of scale for the viewer, for myself, and see what could happen, right? So that was part of the initial idea for my thesis work. All right, and then this is what it looks like as you make your way around the backside of the barn structure. I used to kind of interchange the term structure with sculpture. It's definitely more of a structural object as opposed to a sculptural object, but there are pieces of sculpture, engaging or interacting with the structure. And again, you can see these 3 little small oil paintings, which we'll see better images of later on in the stream here. And then on the back side, there's this very small painting, relief, image, sculpture that deals with the body, and it's a similar size. All of these little paintings are 11 inches by 14 inches, just to give you a sense of scale. And then there's another small sculptural painted object up at the crest of the barn on the back side there. Now, this particular barn was a structure that my mom had on our childhood property. So we moved to this house in Bristol, Wisconsin. I think I was in first grade when we moved there from a town that was just like 10 minutes away. And this is the property and the house I consider my childhood home. It's really where I was raised. I had a lot of my formative experiences here. And one of the amazing things about my childhood and growing up and on this property in Wisconsin was that we had a very long, sort of plot of land, and there were farm fields at the back end of our property, and it just felt like there was a lot of space growing up, which was, something that I really appreciate now as an adult, but definitely kind of got spoiled by as a kid. That sense of privacy or space was a feeling that really grounded my childhood, that gave me a way to make sense of things that I didn't have answers for as a kid, or to feel like I could, express myself in a way that felt authentic without, opinions of neighbors or people passing through where we lived at the time. So part of the reason I wanted to make this body of work for my thesis show was because the summer after my second year of grad school, my mom had called me, and she informed me that, she was considering, downsizing and moving and selling the property. And, my siblings and I had been out of the house for years at this point. And, with a lot of that property and space, it was a lot for one person to maintain and keep up with. And we were starting to kind of move, or we were living in different places. So, it just didn't really make sense. And, as that became more of a reality that, this place where I grew up was not going to be accessible for me anymore, it forced me to really look at the role of place and the role of our home, and how that shaped who I became as a person, and how I, view myself even today. So that was also why this work had to be made at this time for me. And what was really kind of perfect about this project was that the barn as a structure, it kind of became a symbol that could represent myself. It could represent my family. It could represent a physical space. It could represent a psychological space. And it became this very moldable container to put things inside of or put things outside of. And for me, I found that sense of flexibility in form or idea and concept opened up a lot of doors that would have been really hard to just generate conceptually in a sketchbook or through writing in other forms. And as you'll see in this documentation of my show, there are a lot of different moments and different languages in art making that appear in the exhibition. So even in this miniature barn, form, you can see there are bits of like very organic, tentacle worm-like textures in the landscape here, where this miniature barn is sitting. On the lower floor of the barn sculpture here, there's part of a face that I sculpted with a resin, like 2-part epoxy clay, and then I painted, and there's a little bit of colored paper texture that is being pulled out of the mouth, and that texture and that color palette is also something that reappears throughout the show, and it's meant to represent the paper material of piñatas, which anything that's in my exhibition and in this body of work that is culturally tied to like any kind of Mexican culture or Mexican American culture is a form and a symbol that I definitely have some conflicted feelings towards. This sense of belonging it doesn't always feel accurate maybe or appropriate. I grew up in a very rural area in Wisconsin with my mom and her family, and my relationship to my father's culture in Mexico, felt very distant for me, but at the same time, a lot of my childhood had moments where we had piñatas at my birthday parties or my cousin's birthday parties, or I would eat like homemade salsa from recipes from people that are descendants of a similar ethnic background as my father and his family, or we would eat certain foods and cultural foods that I felt represented some of that that background and that family connection as well. So the piñata texture, it kind of comes in as this recurring motif and recurring symbol that's meant to feel a little bit unsettling or a little bit out of place. And that was something that was kind of a tone that I wanted the work to have throughout each piece of the installation. But what you'll see too are like these, I don't know if they're like ribs, I don't know a better term for these arch pieces that hold up the roof in the barn. What I loved about that shape and the repetition of those shapes was that it kind of started to feel almost like a rib cage, and it felt like the inside of a human body. And so there were these moments that kind of were discoveries as I was producing the work that added a lot of new questions that at times I was like, actually, yeah, I really relate to that, or I can really associate that texture or that shape to this feeling that has been really difficult to put into words. And that doesn't always happen in my practice and in my process, whether I'm working in the studio or outdoors. It's nice to hit those moments where all of a sudden you feel like the work in the process is teaching you something, as opposed to, trying to control or trying to really put all of the meaning and all of the interpretation into the work. So here's another image of this miniature barn from the show. You can see a lot of this is made out of wood. The landscape is made from a foam, a construction foam that you can get at like Home Depot and stores like that. And something else to notice here is this string, and the shape of the string that's pulling out the piñata paper is something that you're going to see again throughout other pieces of the show. But you might be able to tell some of the face is painted to look like it has beard stubble and beard hair. And it almost has a little bit of a like polychrome, or I think it's called like polychromos, as a type of art making, especially in like Spanish art history, where sculptors would carve objects and forms, especially figures, out of wood and then paint them, and they had this kind of feel and look and texture to them. But like I said, I sculpted this with a 2-part epoxy that was then painted with oil paint, if I remember correctly. And then this is the front side of that form. And one of the things I really liked about the setup of the exhibition, which that was probably the area that changed the most outside of imagery and like small details of the painting and the barn structure, the placement of where the objects were located and sitting in the gallery, in context of the other parts, that was something that I hadn't really like locked down until probably the end of 2019, like in November, December, and maybe even into 2020. But what I liked about the arrangement of the parts is, like I said, from a distance, you'd walk in the gallery, you'd see the large painting and the barn kind of side by side, and you wouldn't see the miniature object until you walked around the painting. And that sense of discovery, or that encounter of this missing piece or this small piece, was something that I really thought a lot about as I was preparing to install the show. So when we go back and look at this moment, this maybe isn't the best way to show the work, because it's not really, you're not seeing things quite as smoothly as you would if you were in the gallery. But this backside of the miniature sculpture, that was something that was kind of the last part of the experience for a lot of people. That was one part, and then that little cutout in the wood paneling on the back of the large painting. Those two moments were really, they were kind of designed to be the like period of the sentence, right? Or like that closing encounter for viewers in the gallery. So this is a view kind of if you're standing right by the barn, looking towards the right. You can see this large stretched canvas, which like I said, it has its own wooden stretcher that I built with the help of Walt Peebles, the woodshop tech at Michigan State. He's an amazing member of that department and that community on MSU's campus, and I feel very fortunate that my time as a grad student at Michigan State overlapped with his career, and without his help, this project would have not looked anywhere close to what we're looking at now. So he helped me design a very large stretcher that could be bolted together using T-nuts and bolts, so that way you could take it all apart, and each kind of bar and wooden frame that was like puzzle cut with dado cuts using a what are those saws called? Anyway, he showed me how to make dado cuts with each of those panels, so that way they could fit together and be flush when they were overlapping, and then that's where those bolt pieces would go together. So what's nice about the stretcher is that it all comes apart and you can fit everything into like a wagon style car. And then when I stretched the painting, or I stretched the canvas before I gessoed the canvas, there was a way to take out the middle crossbar on the back of the canvas or the stretcher, and then we folded the entire painting around a carpet tube to carry it up technically 6 flights of stairs, or 3 floors, but every floor had like a back and forth zigzag pair of stairs that we had to carry this super heavy, giant, awkward painting that when folded was 6 feet by 10 feet wide, right? So it still was a very large painting, even when it was folded in half. And my wife, Megan, who was my girlfriend at the time, helped me carry this up to my studio it was over winter break when I was in grad school. So I think that was probably in January, like maybe January 8th, January 9th, somewhere in there. We carried this up to my studio on the 3rd floor. And then the show opened the middle of March, technically. That was the install date for us. So that gives you a sense of the timeline here for the painting, at least. Speaking of the painting, so this is the front of the painting, and everything in the exhibition is pretty much called the barn, because it was all exhibited as one, sort of uniform project or triptych installation. The painting itself is also called the barn, and I have some images that I want to share with you to give you some context for what informed the painting, the large painting in my show. So part of the research that I was doing as a grad student was on, like I said, topics of anthropology and sociology. And I remember I came across a chapter from a book written by Michel Foucault, the French philosopher. I believe he's French or was French. And it was, I think, the first chapter in his book, The Order of Things. And in that chapter, he talks about this painting that I just put up on screen. This is a painting by the Spanish Baroque master painter, Diego Velázquez. And it's one of his most famous paintings. It's called Las Meninas. And the painting, it's I apologize, it's such a small reproduction here that I'm projecting, but the painting is a sort of multi-figure portrait, and it's a painting that some historians and some art critics and some artists look at as one of the first paintings in the like modern period of art, even though this was in the Spanish Baroque period. And Velázquez, the artist, is pictured in the painting. He painted himself right here. I don't know if you probably can't see my cursor in the stream. So he's the figure that's wearing very dark clothing to the right side of this large canvas that's on the left of the painting. And so what's really fascinating about his painting is that this is all one solid canvas, and his painting I think is maybe 9 feet by 10 feet or 8 by 10 feet, somewhere in there. And you're looking at a painting that has an artist or the artist working on another painting. So that has created this theory that Velázquez is making a painting of the painting that you're looking at if you're in the gallery with this painting. So part of the reason people think that is because the stretcher that we can see in this painting is very similar in scale to the Las Meninas painting. And at the middle of the painting, in the center lower portion of the canvas, we can see the princess of the royal family. So Velázquez was the court painter for the royal family, and this painting features a lot of the kind of like service and helpers or maids of like staff that helped the princess, or the infanta, I believe was another name for the princess, in this painting. So we're seeing a dog, we're seeing some of the dwarves, we're seeing some of the helpers and assistants to the family, and then I don't remember who some of the figures are in the back of the painting. But if you look right above the princess's head, there's a little mirror in the back of the painting. And what's really interesting about this Las Meninas painting is that where you're standing, if you're right in the middle of the canvas, if you're average height, as an adult, your reflection would be pretty much in this mirror in the back of the room. And if you can see the painting online or in person, it's a very painterly part of the canvas, and it's not very rendered who the identities are of the reflected portraits in the mirror. But there's quite a bit of speculation that is the Spanish king and queen at the time. But we don't see them in the room of the painting anywhere. So one of the things that Michel Foucault, this is a very long story, but one of the things Michel Foucault talks about in that first chapter is this idea of perception and the invisibility and visibility relationship of Velázquez's painting, because we don't actually see the physical bodies of the king and queen in the room where this mirror is. Foucault and other theorists have created this definition or this interpretation of the painting as Velázquez's attempt at bringing the power of the royal family or the rulers of the country down to the everyday person. Whoever is looking at this painting is in the position of the royal king and queen. That on top of the play of the canvas stretcher featured in the painting, there's all of this play on perception in Velázquez's portrait. And that was something when I read Foucault's book that really stuck out to me, is this idea of visibility and invisibility. And when I was planning to make a painting for my exhibition, I remember drawing in my sketchbook, and I came up with this kind of loose composition where I was going to essentially, kind of like a riff off of Velázquez's Las Meninas painting. So if you look over at my canvas, There are some kind of anchor points in the composition that are meant to, connect to or tie back to this particular painting by Velázquez. So what I chose to do, instead of this doubling or this reversal of a canvas, because I was working with the image of a barn, I chose to bring in the side paneling of the barn's front face structure. So what you end up looking at is the space of the garage door opening of our barn that we had. And I tucked my self-portrait just slightly behind that portion of the doorway, kind of as a way to mimic or give a little nod to Velázquez, and the sense of scale of the figure. I tried to tie some of those things back in a little bit. Now, one of the differences, though, that you obviously can tell right away is the height of other kind of key parts of my painting, right? So on the right side, we just have this kind of amalgamation of symbol and reference and image kind of collaged together, painted, but in a very collage-like manner. And then there's this half wall that sort of cuts the composition diagonally here and pushes the attention to the back portion of the interior space of the barn. And what I realized that I wanted to try in this painting was this reversal of the opening of the garage door. So as we make our way towards the back of the interior of the barn, we end up looking at the front of the barn again, but from the back interior. So there's kind of this impossible view happening where this would all be closed off if it was the actual barn. And then I've got a bunch of other small symbols and references here in the painting. This is a file of just the painting, kind of cropped and somewhat color correct. So it's a very warm painting. There's a lot of yellow. There's a lot of umber, earth tones. Some of that was just directly influenced and inspired by Spanish Baroque painting. With Velázquez, I also was doing some research into painters like Francisco Goya, another Spanish painter, more of a modernist painter, or closer to modernism. I had a couple of references to his paintings here as well, which I was going to show. Let's see. One of them was Saturn Devouring His Son by Francisco Goya. And it's a little bit small in this current view of the screen, but I wanted to do a more literal, quoting of certain paintings and certain artists that I wanted to come in and sort of give context to my show as a whole, through some of these painted reproductions. So this one at the foreground here is a very loose and kind of gestural copy of the Las Meninas painting, actually. So if I go back real quick, you can see it's this painting kind of skewed with the perspective of the wall. So we have the canvas here, the princess is painted here, there's the dog, the rest of the figures are kind of loosely painted in. And then we have the Saturn Devouring His Son painting next to it, which is based off of this painting here by Goya. And then at the very back portion of the wall, I don't have this original painting in my slideshow today, but was another painting by Velázquez called something like The Buffoon of San Juan, or it was something like that. I can't remember the full title now, but that's another painting that's kind of quoted here. This small painting next to it was actually a copy of a painting that my great-grandfather painted that is in our family collection. I think my mom, my aunt, my grandmother, and maybe my uncle have objects and paintings that he made that I grew up seeing. And, again, I earlier kind of talked about this headspace that I was in at the time where the barn became this container to, mine personal experience and to uncover influence and, context to what it felt like to grow up in Bristol, Wisconsin, on this property with my siblings and with my mom and with some of our extended family, and how that shaped my sense of self and my understanding of the world in present day in 2019 and 2020. And so part of let's see what some of these next images are. Okay, I was hoping that we would see some close-ups of the painting next. And some of the forms and the images and the references in this large painting, like I said before, they're really meant to revisit like the textures and the characters and pieces of my childhood growing up in Wisconsin. So on my shirt, there's this like drink Wisconsinably, like very popular like graphic that I saw a lot in like the 2010s. And then there's a Taco Bell bag here. We have some like Packer apparel patterning happening. There's a Bears logo, and with some of the reading I was doing in grad school, I ended up reading some chapters and texts on ideas of tribalism and kind of like the social category or term, or just, I'm trying to think of the right terminology here, but some of the research on ideas of tribalism and just the inherent desire to be part of a group that humans have, and how we in contemporary society today, how do we go about sharing our alliances with certain groups. And one of the books or the chapters, I can't remember the source now, that I read talked about these sort of world of sports and fans, and how fans related to fans of the same team versus fans of other teams. And even if you lived in the same city and you were fans of different sports or different team sports, and different teams actually is what I'm trying to say, how does that play out? Where does your loyalty start and end? And how do you find that sense of connection with someone? And if you do, how quickly can that happen? Depending on things like external signifiers like clothing or tattoos or logos that are featured on things that you're interacting with. So when I read that chapter, it reminded me of what it felt like growing up in Kenosha, Wisconsin, which is very close to Milwaukee and Chicago. It's almost in the middle of those two cities. And because of that, it's almost right on the border of Wisconsin. But because it's the southeast corner of the state, it's very close to Chicago. So you get a lot of families that are from Chicago or that live in Chicago that come to Wisconsin and vice versa. So there's a lot of cross, experience that happens between those two states. And we were living in one of the biggest cities along the border of those two states. And Chicago is a very big sports city, if you don't know, and Wisconsin is a very big sports state, right? Green Bay is not on the border of Wisconsin, but fans of those two teams, a lot of times they live on the border, right? And you end up with these pockets of towns that are very split, and those alliances can become very powerful, and that sense of competition between teams can also be very intimidating and kind of scary at times. And growing up in Wisconsin, I remember days in middle school and elementary school where, students would be encouraged to wear their team's favorite jerseys. And you would end up seeing this pretty balanced divide between those two teams that I thought was very interesting as a kid. So I wanted to bring some of that into the painting as well. And it's kind of difficult to see, but there's a phone in a hand that I had painted here. And on the phone is this image that I found online of a kid holding a piñata for like a catalog, like a shopping catalog, and it's actually a catalog that was printed and would ship to our house growing up, for like party supplies and things. And I found this image while doing some just image collecting and research sourcing of material and content online. And I thought it was interesting because the kid who's holding the piñata is a very blonde hair, blue eye, Caucasian kid that's maybe like 10 or 11, and just this idea of ethnicity and skin color and holding these very specific cultural objects. I just became very fascinated on that kind of irony of the advertising there. And the piñata I think that he's holding is this piñata that I ended up painting in my painting too. So earlier I talked about that string that created that triangle shape. That's repeated in the large painting here, and it crosses through both halves of the composition, which I really liked because it gave the painting this sense of circling. Like it became very easy for my eye to move continuously around the painting, and kind of bounce between these different clusters of information. And in this wall, what I really liked about painting this half wall here was I could show the construction of the wall and kind of like the insides of the wall, where there's this oozing material and this oozing gelatin-like substance that a small cartoon character is sort of like pumping into the wall, that I thought was kind of interesting. Let me go back to this real quick. This is another Goya painting that is quoted in my painting. I might have images of it that I can show you here in a little while. There's also, as you can see, some limes. There's in the middle, in the opening, I painted one of the state welcome signs for Wisconsin. And, part of my experience growing up in Bristol, especially kind of in a rural community, was that I had a few moments throughout my childhood that made me feel a little bit unwelcome, or it made me feel like an outcast in some ways. And a lot of those ideas and beliefs seem to be funneled through or learned through some form of representation or media or stereotype in media. And part of making this painting was a way for me to try to understand where all of that came from and how all of that relates to itself and then relates to some larger contexts that I wanted to think about at the time. So I wanted to incorporate just the context of Wisconsin as a whole, and how the sign literally says Wisconsin welcomes you, and I thought about this idea of, are they welcoming outsiders, which I think is the case because they build these signs on the periphery of the state, and they even had these like party flags, which are also things that reappear in my exhibition as well. Now, just for the sake of time, I don't think I'll run through every small detail of the work, and even saving some of that time, I think I might decide to break up this portfolio into two parts, and I might just talk about my thesis show today or tonight, and then do a part two for the rest of this portfolio at another day, maybe later this week. Here's a better shot of some of those details of the self-portrait and just the limbs and the arms, and moments where the paint is becoming a lot more gestural and physical, and then areas where that idea of presence or solidity of the moment is kind of coming into question, right? So we have these arms that are just turning into contours and outlines, and they start to feel almost ghostly or hollow, and I really enjoyed that play of opacity to transparency, and just the feeling and the context and contrast that it gave the painting, especially in those areas. And there's just a lot of very thick, kind of buttery moments and passages in this painting that were still quite, soft and wet when the painting was brought over to the museum in March. And thankfully, everything cured over the summer and fall, and I was able to roll up the painting after the show came down. But here's the other side of the painting, that piñata detail. And then you can kind of see some small pop culture references here. These are taken from the movie Nacho Libre that Jack Black stars in. And that was a character and that was a movie that I watched a lot as a kid that I thought was very funny. I thought it was interesting, and at different points in my life I start to have more information, right? And I have a bigger view on things that I consumed as a kid, and my feelings towards things sometimes drift and change and evolve as they should, right? As we look back on who we were at different times, we can kind of see just how ideas and opinions kind of came to be. And then another sort of theme in this painting is my name, the name Hector, and how that name is represented in pop culture and media. So I ended up finding some things like memes and just different GIFs and things online that featured the name Hector. So this was a small painting of a meme that I found of this, I'm assuming, maybe, for sure like a Latin or Chicano or Mexican, maybe, gentleman who's wearing this very large sombrero. It's almost kind of a ironic, or it's meant to be kind of humorous size sombrero. And then the text over the image says, "My friend Hector just told me a joke and I laughed so hard I almost cheat my pants." And I think the top half of that says, let me see if I can find it real quick. Maybe it's not on my portfolio. It says the Mexican word of the day. I think that's why I was thinking he was Mexican. I think because it says the Mexican word of the day is cheat. And then that's how it's featured in the sentence, right? So it's almost like you read it with this accent in mind, and that accent is sort of hyperbolized through media, and it sort of becomes its own thing, and that meaning or expectation is learned with the quantity of times that you end up seeing or hearing these same representations of people. And so again, what I was doing when I was making this painting was just sort of trying to remember, like, well, what did I interact with and what did I encounter as a kid that related to my name or related to some of the ethnic background I inherited, and this culture that I felt so far away from in Wisconsin, and how did I relate to or make sense of that relationship. So another movie was Napoleon Dynamite. That was another movie that was just super, super popular when I was in middle school. And that was also the time when I really started to become more aware of perception and expectations and feeling misinterpreted by your peers, or feeling like there's a lot of misconceptions about who you are as a person and what your experience is like based on things like phenotypes or your name. And the character Pedro in the movie kind of became another loaded character that I felt informed stereotype for people that I knew in my personal life, and how they would maybe look at me or treat me or assume things about me or my family. And that was a pretty big character for those years when I was growing up. And I mean, don't get me wrong, when I was in middle school, I watched the movie, I quoted the movie, I thought it was hilarious, and I I wanted one of those shirts that said "Vote for Pedro" because I thought they were cool, and it's hard. It's like one of those things where, as my generation, the millennial generation, kind of got older, I felt like, there was a lot of push for being woke, right? And like really trying to undo a lot of stereotyping and racial implications that have really been growing for a long time for a lot of prior generations. And it's hard when, like, even for me, like I watched those movies, I thought they were really funny and I quoted them, and but I think there was also this part of me that felt like I related to some of these characters in a different, more nuanced way that just raised a lot of questions of things like authenticity and relatability, right? Or like, how do I compare or relate to some of these characters that I'm seeing. So again, going back to my name, I found this meme that features the portrait or image of the artist. Oh man, I'm blanking on his name. I think his name might be Noah something, but I could be way off. I used to remember, like when I first made the painting, I remembered his name, and now I'm blanking on his name. But he's played he's played characters named Hector in multiple movies. One of the most famous ones is the original Fast and the Furious movie, which again, that was a movie I watched when I was very young, and I still watch it now. I love that movie. I think it's a really great movie. And whenever I heard my name in movies, 9 times out of 10 it was played by kind of a Latin looking person or a Chicano looking actor, and that felt very significant growing up. Like, it felt very intentional. It felt like, oh, this is, characters that are named Hector in these like pop culture movies and storylines, they're going to have these very, stereotyped experiences or personalities or accents. And, this was one of those actors that portrayed some of those characters. So when I found this meme that someone made, I thought it was like super on the nose for this whole journey I was on in making this painting, this very personal retelling of a upbringing that still has some conflicting feelings for me. And anyway, so this meme basically talks about all these movies that he's been in and the names of the characters, and most of them are Hector, and some of them even say like gang leader Hector or prisoner Hector, and it's just very kind of, I don't know, unsettling, I think, in some ways. And the last character that I brought in this painting and repeated, actually, I think like 3 or 4 times, was Fez from That 70s Show. And if you're not familiar with That 70s Show, it was a popular sitcom in the late 90s into the like 2000s, early 2000s. And one of the characters was called Fez, which was kind of this acronym for foreign exchange student, because part of the running joke of his character in the show is you never actually learn his real name, and you never actually learn where he's from. He's just meant to be this like ambiguous brown character set in literally in the state of Wisconsin. That's where the show's storyline is based. And I mean, they mention cities like Kenosha and Milwaukee and areas that were like in my physical surroundings, in my backyard and my own county. I grew up in Kenosha County, and so this was a character that I definitely saw part of myself in, and there were some of these very strange parallels that came out of the show and my experience, and really held a lot of those early questions on ethnic and cultural identity for me. And so he's featured a few times in the painting. Let's see. This is another shot of the whole painting from the side. This is the back of the painting again. So I must have taken out the rest of the detail shots that I used to have on my website. But really quickly, I'll just kind of run through a few of these. So if you decide to look at these images up close, I won't do that right now because it'll I think it might throw off the video of the stream, but I'll just quickly mention a few things. So some of the other images in this area are from cartoons that feature kind of loaded, stereotyped symbols and signifiers. There's Fez dressed up as Batman in the show, and then there's another scene of Fez right behind that. There's trees from, I think, early maybe Disney movies. I can't remember the name of this particular movie that featured the three birds, that they were kind of like almost like Mexican cowboyish characters with sombreros and pistols. And I think these trees were from that same animation. And then there's a fourth Fez painted here where it's from a scene where he's pretending to be Red Foreman, Eric Foreman's dad. He's like drinking a beer and wearing a hat, one of Red's hats. And, his relationship with Red in the show was something that also provided a lot of meaning for me as a kid. I sort of saw Red's character in a lot of people that I knew growing up in Wisconsin, whether they were part of the Boy Scout troop community or teachers or parents of friends or people I just met in our local community. So I sort of would identify as Fez's character whenever I was in situations like that. Not all the time, but there were definitely moments where I would watch the show and be like, wow, I kind of almost like I can kind of relate to that interaction that they just had. And Red was kind of notorious for being the teller of the jokes on Fez's like ambiguity or stand-in for any kind of like racial injustice or frustrations that Red Foreman's character or Red Foreman felt at the time. And then I have a neighborhood watch sign in here. There's a Trump hat that it's like an image I found of a sombrero with the Trump campaign logo like printed on the sombrero, and I just thought that mashup was really strange and ironic and really loaded as its own symbol. So that's featured in there towards the top. And then this is a little reproduction of this painting that I have up on the screen right now of the two kind of giants, dueling each other in that Goya painting that's on screen. All right, let's go back. Where was I? So like I was saying, on the back side of the painting, we have all of this wood paneling, and that's physical, I think furring strips is what they're called. Wood that I had to just kind of pick up last minute from a big box store, but I had manipulated it to feel like the type of wood we had on our barn. So I wanted that like physical, tangible texture and material like mashed with the painting itself, right? So again, bringing the illusion of space or that illusion of the barn's interior and form, and mashing that with physical, clues and cues on the back or reverse side of the painting. And then I mentioned already once that there's this very small painting in the cutout form. And if we go back to the Velázquez interior, and I was talking about the mirror that's in the back of the room, I did not have a mirror painted in the front part of my painting. And it's such an important part of Velázquez's painting that it was something that I knew was going to be a moment to say something really big or to tie it back to my story in a really important, significant way. And when I read that book by Foucault, or I read that chapter by Foucault, the thing that stuck out to me the most was when he talked about the visibility and invisibility of the royal family to the viewer of the painting, right? And that shift or that transfer of power that Velázquez sort of created for the viewer in the work. And, I thought about this idea of visibility and power and invisibility of influence, and thinking about who is in my story and my childhood and my life that has been a very key person of power, not in a bad way or in a malicious way, but in just a general supportive kind of way, or someone who really shaped a lot of my life. And I thought of my mother, who was someone that I didn't really, in my opinion, I didn't really inherit a lot of her phenotypes. My hair is a lot darker than her hair. My skin's a lot more kind of tan, olivey colored than hers. And, being her third child and the only child with my father, I tend to look a lot more like my dad, who I'm also named after. And so all of my life, this truth, or this part of my story where I think of my mom, and if we're in public, like I sometimes feel like people don't always, see me as her son, or, seeing her in myself physically, right? Even though she's the parent I've had my whole life, and the person who's raised me and given me so much opportunity, she in some ways is kind of invisible, to the outside world or to the outer world. And I wanted to incorporate that relationship that I have with her in the work and in the painting through the symbol of the mirror from Velázquez's painting. And, if we look at the wall, I tried to place the mirror in kind of the same area that it's placed in Velázquez's painting. So it's on a piece of canvas that was adhered to the back of the large stretched canvas. And I liked that it's also kind of being shown through the removal of the wood, right? So it's like I had to crack open this wall of the wood to show you this person that is sort of invisible in some aspects. And that was one of the moments in my show that I really resonated with the most and felt most proud of and excited about. And it just happened very organically in the process. Like, I think partway, or almost when I was almost done with the large painting, I think I realized, like, oh, maybe I should try something with the mirror, and then that's what led to the small painting of my mom in the mirror, because I wanted to also kind of copy some of the look and feel of the palette and the shapes that are in the actual mirror portion of Velázquez's painting. And then this is the barn structure. So I mentioned there are 3 paintings on the roof with this corn decorative pattern that I painted. And again, this is about 7.5 feet tall by 15 feet wide and 12 feet deep. So each of the roof panels that we can kind of see split in thirds, each of those panels are 4 feet by 8 feet. Or actually, no, 4 feet by 12 feet, because I had to add a little 4x4 section on each of them. And the whole form came together in the middle, and the roof was sort of bolted where all of those 6 parts touched together. And I kind of forget about this sometimes, but the amount of work and effort that went into building all of the parts for this installation was kind of nuts and crazy. I just spent a lot of time setting up and taking down and setting up and taking down this particular part of the show, because I didn't have a space big enough where I could leave it up and work on it continuously. So I'd have to work on it on the weekends or over winter break. And luckily I was given some space close to the wood shop in the art building where I could set it up for a weekend, or I could set it up over winter break and leave it there and just run in and out of the wood shop to cut something and attach it and really build it there. But just like the canvas, this was constructed with Walt's help in a way to come apart in pieces that I could manage by myself, and I could lift, one of the 6 roof pieces by myself and carry it down the hall and store it in a storage room for like 3 months or 4 months. Yeah, it was pretty crazy to work on this project. One of the things I really liked about it was the play on scale, and making the viewer feel, much larger than life compared to the barn. So, this was where I had the miniature, I had the monumental and the painting, and I kind of wanted something that was in the middle, and that felt more human scale. More of a 1-to-1 kind of ratio. So that's what the barn structure became. Now, when you'd walk up to the barn, the garage door here didn't function. It wouldn't open or close. It always looked like it was opening, right? That it was in this process of either opening or closing. And I liked that it was sort of frozen in that moment of movement. And that play on this idea of, getting access to something that maybe is private or that is closed off to us, and it's sort of cracked open for a moment. And that's what I wanted the face of that barn to feel like. Now, this is one of the 3 11 by 14 inch paintings. These are oil paintings on paper that was primed and mounted to a panel. This was a little self-portrait that was painted over a drawing that I did on paper, and it has a very kind of Italian glazing sort of style in painting that I was influenced through the work of Gregory Gillespie, who's on the screen right now. So Gregory was an artist that I was introduced to by my friend and amazing painter Daniel John O'Neill, who I mentioned in one of the past streams, who also introduced me to Antonio Lopez Garcia's work. And Gregory Gillespie is an artist that Dan got to meet actually when he was in grad school, and he was a huge just admirer of Gregory's work. And when he first mentioned his paintings to me, I could really sense that appreciation and that love and that influence of Gregory's work and his voice as an artist through the conversation I had with Dan. And when I started looking at images of Gregory's work online, I very quickly fell in love with his paintings too, and just the sense of sincerity and authenticity behind his work is visible from the get-go when you look at his paintings. And he's got a few paintings of self-portraits that have kind of stuck with me. And actually, there's a painting that Dan O'Neill also did that comes to mind too, which is this like shirtless, half-body portrait. And there's a sense of honesty and a sense of I don't know, maybe like universality, or a sense of just fragility, and like the body is this vessel. Like when I look at these paintings by Gregory Gillespie, I feel this like container, body, vessel idea come through the work. And there was a moment, I don't remember when this happened, but partway through grad school, I started to play around with the physical makeup of the body as this object that could be manipulated, in the illusions of my paintings, right? So in this particular painting that I ended up calling Cultural Crisis, it's bringing these very, just sort of disconnected pieces and symbols into one space, and sometimes those objects are interacting with the form of the human body, whether it's a tattoo or whether it's something that the skin of the body is holding. There's other paintings that I was making at this time that played with that process of kind of bending the form and almost like breaking the shell of the vessel. Became a very important part of my paintings in grad school at this time. And Gregory's work was an inspiration and definitely an influence for some of those ideas. These are a few of his other paintings, just to give you a sense of his voice and different sides of his voice that are more representational and maybe what some would call naturalistic, and then areas that are more surreal and inventive and imaginative. So I identify a lot with painters like him and Antonio Lopez, that they work a lot from observation, but they tap into this psyche that isn't present in the observed world, and they make it real, or they make it present through their work. And that was something that I was definitely wanting to do in some of my paintings for the thesis show. So in this 11 by 14 inch painting, I painted this partially from a mirror, because I think I did a drawing from a mirror, and then I had the mirror set up in my studio at home, just in a spare bedroom. And it was a very small panel, so it was easy to work on this at home while I was working on the structure of the barn and the large canvas at school, and then the small sculpture. All of those different parts had their place at that time, and I really was a machine for like 5 or 6 months going into the spring of 2020. But yeah, so we have a Jarritos bottle, the sort of like Mexican soda bottle here that's sort of bending and morphing its shape and form. There are some brick walls with bits of razor wire. There's sort of like this illusion of a sidewalk with chalk drawings. There's corn, a skateboard, hot Cheetos bags, pizza. There's another little mini fire barbecue grill, and there's a tent, and the barn is on fire in this painting. So there's a lot of these different little moments that I just kind of started putting into the painting. It wasn't like I wrote down a list of ideas and objects and symbols, and it just sort of grew over time. And it's a lot like the painting I ended the last live stream with, the second live stream. That's the Sugar Beet painting that had all of these different collaged, grouped moments that, kind of told a story all at the same moment in time, right? So when you look at these paintings, you're kind of left to figure out how you want to navigate the space and how you want to associate and relate different parts. And that sense of multiplicity was something that really held a lot of my show together, between the painting and the sculpture of the barn and the mini sculpture. I kind of wanted viewers to feel overwhelmed by information and meaning, right? So this is a painting that definitely, it had all of that happening at a very intimate scale, and I really wanted to be pretty explicit about some of the details and some of the ideas in this painting as well. And Mr. Euros is a restaurant that is based in Antioch, Illinois, which is really close to where I grew up in Wisconsin. We used to go there a lot growing up, and I mentioned in a painting earlier that I made in grad school, I think this was also in the last live stream, of a sheep carcass that was attacked by a coyote one day, and just that raw natural life cycle image that stuck with me. And I think I might have mentioned that we also had raised lambs growing up that we would sell to Greek families, and they would come and they would buy these lambs from us, and they would use them for meat. I think sometimes for restaurants. I'm not exactly sure those details, how accurate some of those details are, but I remember one particular story that I'll share with you. My brother and I were in high school when this happened, and our sister was away at college, and it was just the two of us. We must have been sophomores maybe at this time, and we were told by our mom that there was going to be a couple of guys coming to take at least one of our lambs, maybe two of our lambs. And they were just going to come, they were going to pick up the lamb, and they were going to leave. And we're home after school, and we see a van come up our driveway, and then we hear a knock on our door, and there's this gentleman there who's speaking to us with a little bit of like a broken English accent, but he kept saying lamb, and like help. And so my brother was he was kind of the primary caretaker of the sheep that we had at that time, and he would feed them, and just sort of most of the time he was the one providing for them. And we also had, I think, chickens and pigs and other animals too, but he was kind of in charge of the sheep. And so he and I went out and showed them where the lambs were, and then they asked us to kind of get one of them for them. And I think they had kind of picked out one, and they wanted us to hold it while they like tied up the feet. And we were like, okay, yeah, we'll help you, kind of get it. You can take it with you and take it in your van, and you can leave or whatever. And so they tie up the feet, and then they immediately grab a knife, and just in the middle of our backyard, they basically kill this lamb right in front of us, and we're sitting there holding the lamb. And neither of us grew up hunting, neither of us really dealt very closely with killing animals, and I just remember holding the lamb for like a few minutes with these men, and I think after a minute or two, they said, okay, we're good, like we got it from here basically. And we got up and we walked inside, and I remember my brother and I just looking at each other and just being like traumatized, and totally shocked and surprised. And I think my brother felt that moment a lot harder than I did. And I think about that from time to time, just that sense of innocence kind of that's lost in that particular moment. And I thought about that because of the euro sign in this painting, and then this sheep that is like portrayed as being cut in half in parts, and it's not a very gory, bloody depiction, but it is this depiction of a sheep that's sort of been cut right down the middle and put in two parts, and it looks like it's still eating and it's still alive. And I don't remember if that was why I painted that in this painting, but looking at it now, that's definitely the memory that comes back to me. And that happened on this property where we grew up, right? So it's like sometimes these pieces and parts, in my head, it's like everything's connected, but there are these moments through a lot of my life where everything feels like it's been thrown up in the air, and I'm left to try to reconnect things or find the associations and figure out how things kind of go back together. And the other thing too is I'm pretty sure that my father also worked at Mr. Euro's or Mr. G's, that restaurant, for a short time. And we grew up eating at this restaurant, and we still sometimes will go there, and we love their food. It's kind of our standard for Euros and Greek food. But anyway, that's a little bit of the context behind that part of the painting. And then this red hand was something that I think I came up with. I don't remember if this was part of the drawing that I made before I made the painting on top of the drawing, or if this was added in later, but the Super Mario tunnel image was something that only is featured, I think, once throughout the show, but I liked the connection that has to ideas of escapism, or just moving between levels of reality, right? And shifting your sense of place, and that sense of growth that can happen, in the game, and just the simplicity of the color palette, and the idyllic, perfect blue sky, and very satisfying synthetic palette of that image, within this very high chroma and really, really saturated space, and I like that word saturated when I look at this painting and I think about my thesis show, because it does feel like things are very oversaturated, right? And that's part of that is sort of part of the idea, is to feel kind of weighed down by all of this stuff, and feeling like things are kind of absurd and they don't really make a lot of sense. But anyway, this was a painting that was definitely inspired by some of Dan O'Neill's paintings, and then this painting by Gregory Gillespie. I just like that sense of honesty and in the painting of the chest area, and just the like very non-flattering kind of portrayal, that it's not really about painting yourself in the best light. It's more about that psychological expression in the eyes and in the face and in the wrinkles and in some of those surface details. So for me, it was a lot of fun to paint the face and the hair, and to work in a more smooth application and layered glazing application of the paint. And even thinking about temperature and the flush heat of the skin in certain parts of the body, and the moments where we have the sunburn. That was another big part of moments of figures in this body of work too, was the way that the skin would alter or transform by overexposure to the sun, and how that would change the value of the skin, right? Not the value in terms of its significance, but in terms of its lightness or darkness, right? More of the art term of value, and the sense of pigmentation that would shift. And like I mentioned, I grew up with my mom's family, and there's more of a kind of European lineage on her side of the family. And I think a lot about how I relate to my community, whether it's my family as a community, my town as a community, the country as a community, and feeling like you're part of the tribe or not part of the tribe, and whether you see yourself as part of the tribe or someone else sees you as part of a tribe are two different things, right? And this kind of goes back to the sports analogy that I talked about earlier. But I thought of the sunburn as this really interesting moment that really can shift the way someone can look, right? And the fairness of your skin can have certain implications or meanings as well, especially in our history. And for me, it's a signifier that feels very personal, and it feels very close to my understanding of my place within my own family structure. And then I have some small kind of wacky, quirky moments like this cactus and this robin egg that are, sitting side by side in this little skin pocket. And, I'm very aware that there are moments where forms have a very phallic form and feel to them. And that's definitely intentional. I mean, for me, growing up without my father and, sort of not having a direct or a single example or model of yourself or of a man or becoming a man at my home life, that was always something that felt kind of awkward for me. And I grew up with my mom. My oldest sibling is my sister, and then it's my brother, and then it's me. And my grandmother has her house just a few doors down from where we grew up on this property. And so I always felt like I was being cared for by women and being taught by women, and which honestly, that's something I'm really grateful for, having that kind of a childhood. But at the same time, it makes a lot of sense where some of my kind of anxieties come from when I'm in rooms that are predominantly with other men, or I'm trying to figure out how I relate to some of the men I've met in my life. And especially like in the Boy Scout experience, where a lot of the scouts in the troop, their dads and fathers would be members of the troop, and they would help organize things, and they would help lead the troop. And being one of the scouts whose dad wasn't part of that community definitely had a big influence on how I understood those relationships, and how I could relate to those relationships. And so when I'm painting, especially myself, my own sort of identity and image, there is this, I feel a sense of awkwardness and a sense of humor and a sense of instability, maybe even in certain moments, like where the neck kind of becomes this like rubbery, noodly kind of shape and form. And I really love the way that the glazing of the skin and the body almost has this unnatural look to it, like the perspective of the chest and the nipples and the collarbones. Like there's areas where it's like, oh, that kind of makes sense, and then it hits a certain angle where I'm like, that really shouldn't be where it is, or it should be turning more. We shouldn't be able to see as much of that part of the body. Or, once I look at the head and the way that the head is sort of pushed out of the frame, it's an interesting kind of combination of perspective and space and volume. But I really liked the way that the figure turned out in this painting, and just some of those different qualities that I've been talking about with temperature and sunburn and form and housing of objects. I mean, this is the one other area I think where the Mario tunnel image comes in, is right by this skin flap that's pushing out this can of some sort of liquid. And then this is one of the few times that I've painted my wife Megan in my work, especially up until this point, where I wanted to incorporate my relationship with her in my thesis show, partially because I was living in Michigan at this time when my mom sold our property, and I was dealing with this sort of like breakup of space, right? It felt like I was going through a breakup with a place that I never thought I would have to break up with. And I was not living in Wisconsin. I was living across Lake Michigan, and fortunately I was not alone through that experience, and even leading up to that moment that my mom had called me, like for 2.5 years I was living in Michigan with Megan, and prior to grad school we were living with her and her parents, and so she, by this point in my life, she had become more of a solid concrete figure and person. And I wanted to include part of that context and relationship in the work, that it was like, fortunately I have someone who's here with me who understands the complexities and the layers to some of these changes in life, and uncertainties and questions and theories and all of those different sides. And she's always been this very positive and optimistic and very strong person that's helped me make sense of a lot of this stuff, especially at that time when I was away from my family and she was away from her family too. So it's like, it really felt like we had our own kind of family in this place that was far from everybody else that we knew and loved at that time. And that sense of connection and unity was really important for me. So I'm really happy that I incorporated that in the painting too. And because it's interesting when I think about my thesis work, so much of it today is clouded by my feelings about this home in Bristol and having to deal with letting go of this home and not knowing what the future was going to look like physically or geographically. And then also dealing with the fact that my father, who had been incarcerated pretty much my entire life, was being released from prison within the same month or 2 months that my mom had sold our house. And so there were these very big changes that happened in a very short time that kind of rocked my sense of self. It rocked my sense of space and time a little bit, and definitely reminded me that life is not gonna go the way you think it's gonna go, and if you have a constant in your life, that's actually kind of unusual, that life is actually the opposite of constant, right? It's it's this experience of change, and not having control, and not having the ability to save the things we want to save, or keep what we want to keep forever, and that this was one of the first times I think I had real experiences like that forced their way into my work and into my thought process. And it sort of felt like at that time I'm like, there's nothing else I can be painting about right now. This is the most important thing. And this really encapsulates who I am right now in time, and a lot of these things just organically landed on canvases and on panels and as sculptures, and as you'll see in animations. And that was my way of kind of processing a lot of that stuff at this time, and so thankfully I had someone that was with me through that experience who really understood, what led up to those big moments of change for me, and, could kind of see it from a more personal perspective. It's funny, like a year and a half after I made this painting, we got engaged, which is pretty cool. But the crazy thing too is, shortly after I made this painting and finished my show is when the pandemic started, so I was going into the year of 2020 from December to January. I can remember it clear as day, even though it was only a few years ago, but it's 2024 now. So 4 years ago, I remember thinking like, all right, 2019 was a weird year and a lot of stuff, was unexpected, but 2020 is going to be, this is going to make up for it. It's going to be a really good year. And I had put really big hopes and expectations on 2020 to kind of make up for some of the stuff that happened in 2019. And, 3 months later, I was not ready for what was happening, what was going to happen next. But I don't think I have an image of that third painting on the roof of the barn currently. I might go back later and add that to the portfolio. But this is a form that's on the top of the roof of the barn. I'm going to get rid of this Gregory Gillespie image. This is the last image from my files that I was going to show anyway, so let's take that off. This is a form that's on the top of the roof of the barn, and you can see this piñata texture happening again. And it was a very simple object that I had sort of layered and covered with paper that was hand painted. I remember Megan actually helping me paint a lot of these little strips of paper and helping me finish my project, because there were so many different moving parts to making this installation. The other thing that was kind of crazy about this time, like from January to the beginning of March in 2020, right before the pandemic really kind of happened for us in Wisconsin and Michigan and the Midwest, in January and February, I was teaching a sculpture class for the department at Michigan State, and it was my first semester teaching a sculpture class. And I was having a really wonderful time teaching that class. I had a great group of students. It was a lot of fun. I really enjoyed the format. By that point in my third year, I felt more confident and comfortable in the classroom. I really, I was taking a lot of pride in personalizing the information in ways that felt unique to myself as an instructor. So I kind of felt like I was finding my voice as a teacher at that time. And I was working on my thesis project, so I was putting in like, I don't know, maybe 15-hour days or so, like 12 to 15 hour, 10 to 15-hour days pretty consistently for like 2.5 months, where, I'd be teaching 2 days a week for, 3 or 4 hours a day. And then, all of my time outside of that, I was putting into making my thesis show and starting to write some of my thesis statement and thesis, like actual thesis writing, preparing for the artist talks that we would eventually have to give as well. And then on top of that, I was invited to do this collaboration and exhibition with an art center in Saugatuck, Michigan, which is on the west coast of the state of Michigan, right off of the lake, Lake Michigan. And it's about an hour, I think it was like an hour and a half drive, maybe a little longer from Lansing. And there's a really amazing art center there, the Saugatuck Center for the Arts, who had found my work and invited me to come do a show, I think over the summer of 2019. And then they invited me back to do a kind of like low residency, teaching residency experience where I would work with 4 or 5 different middle and high schools in the area, leading an art project with them. And I chose to do this project that was inspired by some of the work I was doing in my own thesis show with stop motion animation, which was a medium that I had a lot of interest in all through grad school, and just took a while to kind of figure out the process and the tools and the materials. But I'm very happy and thankful that it was something I could explore and incorporate into my thesis show. So for the Saugatuck residency between January and February of 2020, there were like 4 different weekends between those 2 months where I would drive to Saugatuck on Thursday, spend the night on Thursday, and then all day Friday I would be doing programming with middle and high school students from a couple schools, and then I think Saturday morning I would hit 1 or 2 other groups before driving back. I would meet with another couple of groups I think on Monday, and then I would drive back on Monday to Lansing. So I would go for these extended weekends in January and February. And the nice thing was that on Saturday and Sunday I could, just work on some of my small pieces of my thesis show. And it was kind of a crazy, very ambitious time that I'm really grateful that I had the opportunity to share my story and work with some of their population of students, because I think we ended up working with over 300 students during those trips in total. And we set it up in a way where every weekend that I would go, I would see the same students every time. So I saw them like 3 or 4 times in those 2 months. And then at the end of those 2 months, we put up a kind of a pop-up show of these little self-portrait puppet figures that they would make. And that was sort of my concept for the project with them is, I was thinking about my stop motion animation work that I was doing, and I'd sculpted this little self-portrait figure out of wire and clay and upcycled clothing and hot glue and paint and, stuffed animal fur for the hair. And so I had this example that I shared with them, and then I would demonstrate how to make your own little figure. And so then the students would work with their art teachers while I was gone for the week or the 2 weeks in between the sessions. And then I would critique them and give them ideas and just hang out with them. And so that's what they showed at the end of that project. So when that had ended, I think I was pretty close to finishing my thesis show. It was like the end of February, maybe the very beginning of March, somewhere in there, when we had all of those figures shown. And then within like 2 weeks, I had wrapped up my thesis show. And right at the end of those 2 weeks, like March 10th and 11th, I remember we had a meeting with the staff at the museum. And it was like our final walkthroughs with our committee members. By this point, COVID had reached the US and people were starting to get very nervous. Students were starting to say like, hey, I think I might go home. The news was crazy, and it was just, everything was very uncertain and scary and strange at that time. But as far as I was concerned and as far as I was told, I was expected to have all of my work done and ready to be dropped off and installed the week of like March 15th and 16th, like that Monday through that week. So we had to drop everything off on Friday, March 13th. And I was fortunately able to get everything done with the help of Megan and some of the other students that were there. And yeah, basically we dropped off our work, and I think by that point the university had issued like a campus-wide option that students could go home, and most people did. So it was a very surreal and strange moment, and it was also, for me personally, it was a very exhausting and stressful time because I had just completed that teaching residency opportunity. I was, kind of in the middle of teaching my sculpture class for the first time, and that was going pretty well. And then I had just completed my thesis project, and everything was kind of supposed to be almost done at that point. But basically we were still allowed to set up our shows in the galleries, and then that by the end of that week everything was moved online for the rest of the semester, and that included like our artist talks that we gave, and some of the like initial sharing of our exhibitions. So we were supposed to show our exhibitions with an opening reception, I think, that following Saturday. So that would have been like March 21st or 22nd or something like that, like somewhere in that range. And, having gone to those receptions my first 2 years of grad school, I was really, really excited about that experience and that portion of the MFA experience. Like, to me, from the first week of my MFA candidacy, that was really the big moment. I wanted to walk into the museum and experience this project and experience this work with people in the room and in the space, and hear what their reactions were, and see the way that they responded to the work, and just share that moment with the community of people that I got to know and felt very proud to be a part of. And that's something that I've never gotten over, and I don't think I will ever really feel totally happy with the way that things turned out, because basically what happened is, after we installed our shows, the museum closed down, and even during the installation, like, we had to social distance and wear masks if we had them, and we set up our shows, and the doors closed, I think, until August or September of 2020. And then when the museum reopened, it was like limited occupancy. So I think, for like 3 or 4 months while the show was up, maybe 10 people or 12 people could be in the galleries at the same time. And, it really just kind of diluted the reception for the show that I thought it was going to have, and it just was difficult to kind of accept the way that all unfolded for me. And, for the first few months, like in April and May, and then through the summer, just knowing all of this work was in the galleries and nobody had seen it still, but I had technically graduated and I was done with my MFA, and everybody was living in this very weird, surreal, scary, uncertain time. It was hard. Like, I remember just initially feeling really heartbroken and really disappointed and really frustrated, and feeling a little bit like I was cheated out of this really important experience that I worked really hard for and took very seriously, and really pushed what I was capable of, in terms of scale, but also in terms of like thought and intention, and really putting more of myself into the work. And those feelings grew with every week that passed in the pandemic, and they started to shift, and I began to start to see and understand what was really happening at that time, which had nothing to do with my show. It had nothing to do with art. It had nothing to do with me as an individual. It was this insanely unprecedented moment and experience that was way worse for so many people, and it was a lot more scary for a lot of other people. And I started to feel really guilty and kind of ashamed that I allowed myself to get bombarded by those personal frustrations, and just those feelings of disappointment, and it's hard, it's a very complicated experience to think about for me personally, because, I really, really was looking forward to the end of my MFA, just following the suit of what I had seen, the few years before, and stories I'd heard from faculty and professors or artists that went to grad school, and just, imagining like, oh, I wonder what that will feel like for me, and just being totally blindsided by what ended up happening with COVID. So anyway, it was just, that was the way everything unfolded at that time, which was really crazy. And before I get too off track with some of the COVID retellings, I did want to just talk about some of these pictures that you're looking at right now. So these are images from the inside of the barn structure. So when you would look through those little gaps in the garage prop kind of door, you would see this interior space, which, like I said, is 12 feet deep. So it's a pretty good amount of space that you're looking at. And inside are these, the first thing you probably noticed was a projection of a video that is on the back wall. And it's a looping animation that I created, a stop motion 3D animation. So it's made with physical objects that I, move slightly in photograph and move slightly in photograph. And then when I stitch them all together, they create this, this time-based movement and this kind of storyline that happens. So that 3-minute animation is looping, and I'll play the video here kind of at the end of the stream. And in front of the animation on the back wall are some different objects and forms. So part of what you can see here is the cutout shape of the piñata. That donkey piñata is hanging from the ceiling of the barn. And part of the reason I chose a donkey piñata is because we had 2 donkeys on our farm through like high school. And, when my mom sold the house, the donkeys got to stay on the property, and the new owners, have kind of continued to take care of them with the horses that they ended up bringing, as far as I know. But anyway, that was part of the reason I chose a donkey. And then you can kind of see a little bit of piñata kind of paper that's happening on the ground there. And to the left, there are these 2 vertical forms, and those are legs that come down to the ground, and at the bottom are these 2 cowboy boots that I had painted. I had found and then painted them with New Balance logos on them. But the interesting thing was at the top, where the 2 legs met the roof of that space, that's where that piñata kind of upside down U form connected to. So, from the outside, you see something that then turns into something else in the inside of the barn. And, part of something that I remember a student that I was talking to when I was making the show had pointed out to me, something I was just totally missing and overlooking, was with the piñata, the image of the piñata, and all of these ideas and all of these, inner kind of like conflicts with my own ethnic and cultural identity, and, feeling kind of bombarded by questions throughout my life that people will come up and ask, like questions from people of all different backgrounds and different generations. I've gotten questions like, where are you from? And like, where are your parents from? And it's always trying to get to this same conversation of like, ethnically, what are you related to? What are you tied to? And because that question has come up so many times in so many different ways throughout my life and from so many different kinds of people, it's made me feel like I must appear as this very ambiguous person, and part of the reason I think that is because sometimes I'll say, oh, my mom's side, there's a lot of European, descent, and then on my dad's side, he's Mexican, and then that's usually when they go, oh yeah, that makes sense, and but sometimes people say, oh, you kind of look Greek, or you kind of look, Middle Eastern, or they'll kind of throw in like these other cultural, ethnic, geographic regions of background, and most of the time those moments aren't like negative and frustrating or disheartening or trying to exclude me in any way. It's usually, I think, people are just genuinely curious about who I am and what my family looks like and where their background is, and maybe they feel like they're going to relate with me on some new way that they don't already know. But then there's times too where it feels like people are maybe not as genuine about it, or they're not as interested in the way that I would have preferred them to be. And anyway, I was talking to a student about just that experience when I was at Michigan State, and they were looking at some parts of my show. I remember when I was working on it, I forget who this was, but they pointed out the piñata as this, like, that I am the piñata, right? Or that experience is the piñata. It's this moment of breaking something open to see what the insides are and to collect the insides, right? And it's like that, when they said that, it might have been another grad student, but when they said that, it was like the glass shattered, it's like that moment of realization, like, wow, that was right in front of me this whole time. I didn't even see it. I didn't even connect that. And that became a moment throughout the show that I tried to push a little bit more explicitly, like in the mouth with the piñata texture coming out of the mouth. It's almost like this binging of that experience, right? Or the piñata turning into the legs, into the cowboy boots, into the New Balance cowboy boots, or seeing the piñata cut out of wood that's this compressed, flat, prop kind of object, or this silhouette of an object with all of its texture littered on the floor inside of this barn. Like, for me, those are the moments that really kind of pushed the show into a more powerful place for me, when I was working on the work and working on putting everything together and asking questions, and when I look at moments like that in the whole body of work, it reminds me of what it felt like to produce this installation and to produce this work. It just felt like one of the most important projects I've ever gotten to do, not because it was for my master's degree and it was like my capstone thesis project, but just because of the work and the ideas and the stories and the moments of experimentation and exploration that happened, and really not knowing where things were going to end up and really learning through the process. And it felt very exciting to be on that journey, and it just felt so fulfilling and rewarding and gratifying and eye-opening and enlightening. And I'm really, and that's, I think now I'm at a point where there's been enough time that has passed since how COVID sort of interrupted the back end of the experience of making this work, and really totally flipped upside down what my expectations were about the reception for the show, and what this show maybe would have led to in terms of conversation or in terms of realization and those sorts of things. But now that it's been a few years and I can see this period of my career from a bit more of time and space and distance, I'm just very thankful that I even got to do this, and that I had the space and the time, and I had funding opportunities to help pay for a lot of the material costs, and I had a community of faculty that sat with me in meetings and helped me develop the idea and helped me develop the process and the potential for the project. And Stephen Bridges. That was a curator from the Broad, the MSU Broad. But yeah, the faculty members and the technicians at MSU, Walt Peebles, Michael McCune, who recently passed away, and Jacqueline Sullivan. I mean, there were so many people that encouraged me at that time and supported me. And they could tell there were moments that I didn't feel like I was doing what I should have been doing, or like that this project was too much, or that it didn't fit the like research trends that maybe grad MFA shows were supposed to have. And like maybe it was too, what's the word? Maybe it was too, I'm blanking on this word, not sympathetic or sincere, personal, there's a word, I'll think of it later, but, that, yeah, like the personal is, not as contemporary or something. And I had moments where I kind of was doubting, like, oh, maybe this isn't, researchy enough or cross-disciplinary enough. And those were people that just, they looked at what I was doing. They said, yeah, man, keep going. Like, this is awesome. And, you're awesome. You're doing great. And we're proud of you and we're excited for you. And, we're impressed or we're inspired or we're happy you're here. We're happy that you're doing this and you're pushing yourself and you're pushing your work, you're pushing your boundaries. And, that period before COVID, like everything up to COVID was just incredible. And, I'm just very grateful that I got to even like go on that ride, and learn so much during that ride, about things that I didn't even know were going to happen. Real quick, I'm going to play this. I wonder if I can maybe move. Sorry, I'm just doing a couple things here on the fly. I'm just going to enlarge this video player for us real quick. That way you can see things a little bit better. And it's funny because I'm streaming a YouTube video on YouTube, so you can go and watch this on your own devices at some point. But just for the sake of the stream, I'll end the portfolio talk here with the 3-minute video that I created using 3D stop motion techniques. So this is made with plasticine clay, paper. It's actually set in that miniature barn that I showed earlier. So I kind of treated that almost like a little stage. But it's a 3-minute loop with some audio, so that's why I turned on the system audio here. I hope it's not too loud. So I'll talk a little bit about that video now. I did just see that my friend Jane Shank commented in the chat. She said, "Hello, hi Jane. Thanks for tuning in to my live stream. You're catching just the last little bit here. I've been going through my portfolio, and this is all the work I made for grad school for my MFA. And that animation that I just showed was featured in the back part of a barn structure. I don't know if you caught that part of the live stream or not, but thank you so much for tuning in. I'm really glad that that you shared that you were here in the comments. Thanks for doing that, or in the chat. So anyway, I'll just talk really quickly about that video clip. So that was like about a 3-minute stop motion animation project video that I made. I'm not really a video artist, and it's the only stop motion artwork I've ever created, and just rewatching it makes me want to try this medium again, because it's so much like any other type of malleable art form, whether it's sculpture or painting or drawing, but you have that sense of time at your disposal, right? Or like you have control over time, and you get to bring things to life. And it was a medium that was also very labor intensive and time intensive. So, again, kind of setting the tone for the trajectory of my thesis show being produced from like November to February or early March, from 2019 to 2020. I had also just finished this animation, and I was ready to kind of just celebrate and share the show with people, and then COVID happened. So it was a very strange time period, but when I was working on the animation, something that happened was, I had a very loose idea for the video. I knew I wanted to have this ambiguous kind of flexible character or object that felt like a figure, or it felt like a person, that was very indescribable, right? It was very ambiguous. It was just this little blob, but it was going to be encountered by objects that to me held some kind of cultural and maybe even like ethnic significance. So, through a lot of my discussions I've been having here in the live streams, I've been giving some context to how I relate or associate to certain foods or certain forms of media and pop culture, and how some of that matter, for lack of a better word, creates meaning or provides opportunity to make sense of something, or to make sense of yourself, right? And how you relate to certain people or relate to a certain group of people. And so I've been talking a lot about my conflictions with those things, right? And in this video with the animation, I don't know how easy it was to see this in the clip I just played, but some of the things that were being consumed and digested by this clay little blob were recreations of like hot Cheeto chips, and that was a food that my cousins on my dad's side of our family that live in Chicago had introduced my siblings and I to when we were little kids. And so I think of them, and I think of the family that's beyond them on my father's side, and then there were tamales that I had made little illustrations of that were fed to this little figure, and there was a lime wedge that kind of was replicating the little lime portion of that self-portrait painting that I showed a while back in the stream tonight. So one of the things that the video became about was this idea of consuming culture, right? Or consuming ethnic food and signifiers that for me related to this group of people that I felt very distant from, I felt very far away from, yet I had this way of interacting with the culture or with the group of people through different forms of consumption, right? Whether that's music or movies or food. So all of those objects that are being fed to this little creature subject are things that remind me or take me back to moments of my childhood or even my adulthood, right? And I think there was even like a Modelo beer that was given to the little figure. But that was kind of the last part of the whole puzzle for this installation. So when I had to kind of categorize the show, it was really hard for me to figure out what the right verbiage was, because it had painting, it had sculpture, it had animation, it had installation with props and multiple objects, and when I spoke with some of my committee members, I remember they were the ones that were like, you could just call it a mixed media installation. And I was like, okay, that works, and the dimensions kind of vary. Like if I ever showed this entire body of work again, which isn't possible because a lot of it was torn down and cut up and repurposed, but parts of it I still have, like the big painting, and some of the small pieces and the smaller paintings I still have. But in terms of the label, we could say like, it could just say like dimensions vary, right? If it's ever exhibited again. But it's interesting because in the last 3 years, my practice has definitely gotten a lot smaller since this time. I mean, that was one of the things I kind of said early on in the chat tonight, was that being able to show my work in such a beautiful, large, generous amount of space in these galleries, I wanted to try something really substantial and really big in terms of scale, and also in terms of like scope in the meaning and the history and the storytelling that I wanted to explore. So obviously, part of the reason my work has gotten a lot smaller since this time is because I don't have the physical space to produce work this big or to show work that's this big. And what's been interesting too is that through graduate school and then in the last 3 years since graduating, painting has always been the primary medium for me. And it sort of made sense to me over the years that I think for me painting is very fitting, conceptually, because it is this very surface level medium where you're really changing the surface of something. And so much of my personal stories that I've expressed through studio work over the years deals with this idea of the perception of the exterior versus the interior, right? And I think of painting as this medium that really gives us an opportunity to like alter or control the way the surface of something looks and can be read, right? So I'm really happy that it was something that I was also able to really feature a lot in this capstone body of work. But I'm just checking the chat that Jane had added to. Is it hard to know what to let go of your older studies? Yeah, I mean, I'm not sure. I mean, I'm if I'm interpreting the question the right way, but if when you say studies, if that's talking about like just the influences of the education, like what faculty taught me, or more of like the research side of studies, or is studies like small paintings or small experiments for larger work. I'm not sure which one you meant, but I'll answer both. So in terms of letting go of like what I was taught, yeah, for sure, I think that is difficult for me at times, because there's a quote, I forget whose quote this was, if this was Philip Guston, I think, that said this. Oh, for artwork. Okay. Yeah, I mean, well, for artwork or for studies of artwork, sometimes it is. Yeah, I mean, like for my thesis work, this was one of the hardest times I've experienced for letting go of physical artworks, because it was very personal, and it represented a very like significant time of development for me. And it also culminated in 3 years of studying and researching and learning how to make art in different ways that I hadn't been pushed to make work in prior. So like some of these small pieces of the miniature barn, I ended up having to get rid of that just because we didn't have space. Parts of the barn on the outside and parts of the barn on the inside, I was really sad to get rid of. Like the donkey, it would have been cool to keep that flat donkey pinata piece. I don't think I have I might still have those New Balance cowboy boots. I hope I do, because I showed those a year prior to my thesis show in like a 2-person show on campus, and that was a pretty popular piece. So I hope I still have those. But yeah, sometimes it is and other times it's not. I think part of it is when it feels like the work has become an extension of myself. And it sounds weird to say that as if there are pieces I make that aren't extensions of myself. But I think it's a spectrum, right? Like there's paintings we make where maybe it's the image or the representation of what's being presented in the work, even if it's an abstract painting. Like maybe it's a certain texture or it's based on a certain memory or a certain sensation that you really connect with deeply. Those paintings that become associated to that very personal, important, significant part of ourselves are, for me anyway, it's really hard to separate yourself from that, and there have been a few paintings that I've sold over the years that I'm like, man, I really wish I had that painting still, because those are the paintings for me that still, when I look at my images of them, I'm like, oh, I still resonate a lot with those paintings. Like the self-portrait little painting that I showed in the gallery walkthrough kind of stream tonight was purchased by a gallery owner like it was in 2022. So 2 years ago, a year and a half ago. Doesn't really matter, but there's this painting was sold, and I kind of wish I still had this painting. As for me it's a very unique painting. I haven't made a lot of paintings that have this sort of feeling and have this range of diversity in image, but also diversity in like the way the forms are being pushed and represented. But even in like some of my plein air kind of like landscape paintings too, there have been a few where I'm like, man, I really wish I still had that painting too. And but most of them, if they sell, I'm usually okay with letting go of them. And when I realized that it's possible to have a career as an artist, not that it's an easy career, but after I'd met a few artists that worked full time as painters and artists, I kind of accepted that that's part of the job, is that we have to be willing to let go of our work, and we have to be willing to exchange that for our income and our livelihood. And not that it isn't challenging at times, but most of the time I'm like, I go into making paintings knowing like, well, maybe someone else will have this at some point, and like this is a painting I still have with me at home, and I'm really glad I still have it. But yeah, that's a really interesting question. I've had conversations with artists about that question before, and I've met some people where it's like anytime they lose a painting, it's really, really hard. And then I've met people where they've never felt like they've missed a painting that they've made. Actually, when I was in Vermont with Charlie Hunter and Doug Fryer and John Lasseter like a couple weeks ago, that conversation came up, and Doug Fryer, I think I had asked him like, are there any paintings you wish you still had? And he thought about it for like a minute or two, and he's like, yeah. He's like, there is a painting that I really wish I still had, and yeah, I hope it's okay that I share this on YouTube. I don't know if people will really even see this, but he had said something like, yeah, there's this very small still life painting that he painted that was of this bowl that I think his wife had thrown on the wheel, like a pot that she had made. And he had placed these plums that grew in their yard that he was like watering and taking care of and waiting to like be able to harvest. And they were finally ready, and he took these plums and he placed them in the bowl, and he like painted them, just like a little portrait almost of that scene, a little still life. And he said he painted it in like 4 hours. Like it just flowed right out of him, and then he put it in a show and somebody bought it and he never saw it again. And he was talking about it like, he's like, that's a painting that I wish I still had, because like the bowl, like that's my wife's bowl. She made that bowl, and then he said the plums, like those were my plums. Like I grew those plums from our yard. And he said, even when you look at the painting, you can see the little smudges where the dust on the skin of the plum, like that kind of like matte, kind of dusty surface that they have, like where some of it was removed from his fingers, where he had placed them in the bowl and like changed the surface of them. And even as he talked about it, I was just like blown away, because it kind of speaks to the power of art making, where if you're really thinking about the process on a level that is like, hey, this is my life, this is my time, this is how I feel, this is my philosophy, this is my understanding of my experience, if that's really where you're thinking, even if you're not thinking that sort of way while you're working, but you stop and you think about what you've made in that lens or through that lens, I think you end up, you start to look at your work as like these artifacts of time, and like they're like these time capsules that are part of us and are part of the maker. And I think for some people, it's like you end up surprising yourself, like you can't always predict which paintings are going to be the ones that are going to really, hit us. And when he told that story, he kept talking about how it's just like, he's like, it's just this small little painting, it's this like intimate little painting. And I just thought it was such an amazing, honest story that he shared with us. And yeah, it was pretty cool. It's pretty cool to hear him talk about that. But yeah, I don't know. That's a really good question. I'm glad that you asked that question. Thanks, Jane, for tuning in and for saying hi and asking a few questions. I really appreciate it. And doing these live streams is something that I've kind of been considering for a while. And I was just telling my wife Megan tonight, I'm like, I've been having a really fun time doing this, because I'm pretty aware that my portfolio is very diverse, and I've made a lot of different work over the years, and I've experimented a lot with my paintings and my artwork. And sometimes I'm meeting people in an exhibition where some of my surreal studio work is being shown, and sometimes I'm meeting people through the plein air events. And there's always these moments nowadays where people are kind of like trying to understand each side and each facet of what I'm working on and what I'm doing. And I sort of feel like the live stream is this opportunity now to kind of go back and provide some context and recall the influences and just put all the pieces together and find the thread through this really exciting and fun adventure I've been able to be on. So I'm glad you're here. I'm glad you tuned in, and I'm glad that you're enjoying it. I hope you'll come back when I do this again. I think I might try this on Thursday. We'll see how things go this week. I'm leaving to go to Florida for a plein air event, my first one this year, down in Tequesta, Florida, for the Lighthouse Plein Air Festival. And I'm flying out on Saturday, so depending on how my preparations are looking, by Thursday I might try to squeeze in one more live stream. I'm not sure if it'll be during the day or in the evening, but I'll probably go ahead and move through the rest of this portfolio. So this is kind of a preview of work that I made after I completed my MFA and kind of in the first year of the pandemic. So a lot of this is very small scale and some kind of wacky experimental ideas that I was pushing at that time. So we'll see. I might even have time tomorrow on Wednesday. My goal is to try to get through every portion of my portfolio on my website within the next couple of weeks, because I would much rather be, I shouldn't say much rather. I'm enjoying doing this sort of like retroactive art talking, art discussion. Yeah, that sounds great, Jane, if you are able to set up the notification little bell thing. It's weird. I'm not an expert when it comes to some of the YouTube stuff, but whenever you're free and if you have time, it's always fun to interact with folks and friends in real time like this. So I appreciate you tuning in while I'm still live. But I was just going to say, once I'm through each section of my studio portfolio, then I'll go into probably my plein air portfolio, and I'll talk about some of those paintings, and then I'll just work my way through the rest of these different portions of my portfolio. And yeah, I mean, part of the goal with doing this, I think, was also to just kind of, give this kind of like commentary around some of the inspiration and where some of these projects happened, especially with like murals or commissions, and to share those different chapters. Because what I've realized, and I was kind of talking about this a little while ago, just, having done so many different types of painting, especially, but even other mediums, when I make something right now, like today or tomorrow, and whether it's a studio painting that's from my imagination, or whether it's a commission for a client, or whether it's a plein air painting or a color study, all of these experiences that I've had through each mode of making and each mode of thinking is going to somehow influence what I'm doing today. And even though when I look back on all of these portfolios, I feel like they're kind of different and diverse. It's nice to be able to have all of this experience especially when I make a plein air painting and I'm traveling to go somewhere I've never been, and I'm trying to be pretty honest and open about where the work can go, and some of those ideas come out of studio paintings I've made and lessons I've learned in not controlling the process, right? Or trying not to control the outcome of the work. And those were lessons that I learned in the studio as opposed to in plein air. But it's cool. It's been really fun to get to a point where I feel like these different modes of making are starting to overlap and kind of merge together. And even with some of my what I would consider studio work is incorporating more plein air techniques where I want to construct forms and objects. And I think you're aware of that because I know you had posted something about one of my boxes being already existing in plein air or in nature, and just that idea of kind of like disrupting the environment and allowing myself to interact with the place and the setting before I make the painting. And those aren't things I've done at events and when I'm traveling for a plein air show, but when I have my own time and I want to make work that sometimes I'd rather be outside painting from natural light and in a space that is primarily out of my control, but then to find ways to interact with that and change something or introduce something that's not there prior, those moments become really interesting to me. So anyway, long story short, I think it's been really cool just to kind of end up in these places where it's like, hey, I can kind of allow things to overlap a little bit here and see what can happen. So I think that's pretty much going to bring me right to the end of the stream now that it's been a little over 2.5 hours. If people are watching this after it's been recorded and put up on YouTube, thanks so much for watching, especially if you watch the entire video and invest some of your own personal time into learning about my process and influences and ideas. And this was a really long conversation or discussion on my thesis show. So I hope you enjoyed it. And if you have any questions or comments about any of the work, feel free to add those in the comments under this video. If you do decide to visit my website and you have questions about things there, you can always reach out to me over on the contact page through the email submission form there. And then before I end, I will just put out a few plugs real quick that I'm going to be sending out a newsletter to my email list subscribers. That's, it's not exactly like stuff I'm talking about in these videos, but there are a few announcements that I'll be sharing and upcoming events that I want to share with people that might be interested. And I also, like I mentioned, I think at the start of the stream, if you do sign up, there are some perks that are exclusive to that list and that channel of information. I tend to put, seasonal coupons to my shop in there, and sometimes I'll put promotions or giveaways to stickers and, kind of like smaller process material. So if you're interested, you can sign up also through the contact tab on my website. And then if you're perusing my site, please take a moment and check out my shop. I do have some work in a couple of local galleries here in Wisconsin, but a lot of the sales I've been fortunate to have over the years have been through my website independently, and to those collectors, I'm very appreciative. If you're a new collector, if you're someone who's considering purchasing one of my original paintings, or maybe a sticker or a print or a zine or a book or something, and you're on the fence about it and you have questions, or you'd like to see more images or videos of those listings, let me know, and I'm always happy to share more documentation of things or answer questions you might have. But and then the last thing I'll just say is, if you're interested in studying with me and learning from me, I do offer a few teaching opportunities. So I'll just quickly share those. On my website, I have a teaching tab where you'll find my schedule of workshops that are coming up this year, and then any announcements for private classes or mentoring opportunities, which are they sort of come and go. My season is going to start to pick up here pretty soon for plein air events and teaching workshops, so I might cut back on some of the private teaching opportunities. So go ahead and take a look, though, if you're interested. Some of the events and workshops do have links that are on the home page. I have to go in and actually add those here. That way you can click on a workshop and it'll take you directly to the landing page where you can find more information or register if you plan to sign up. But so there's a bunch of stuff here for teaching. I also try to share some things just, free of charge, like a book reading list. These are books that have definitely helped my art practice, whether it's for studio work or plein air work. I try to share this list with anybody who might be on my website, so you can find a bunch of books that are more technical on painting and color theory, and some of them talk about composition and plein air painting, figurative painting. And then there are a few at the very bottom that are a little bit more theoretical and philosophical on aspects of things I like to paint, or even art theory at large. So if that's something that you're interested in, also check out the list for some of those texts. A cool thing about the list is that if you hover over the title, it will bring you directly to the text on Amazon if you want to buy the book. So it makes it really easy to make sure you're buying the exact text that I'm listing here. But if you want to search it, there are the author names there as well. And then there is a link here, which I'm not sure if people always are aware that this little icon is a button that you can click. That will bring up a PDF document of materials that I use in my art practice, especially my plein air art practice. So, you know, some of these objects and tools also have hyperlinks that will take you to the company website where you can buy them. Or if they're things that I made by hand, some of them have YouTube video links where you can find tutorials on how to make your own. They're not my tutorials most of the time. They're the ones that I use to build the stuff that I have. So check that out. There's my palette of colors and brushes and all that kind of stuff too. So that's also on the teaching page. And then, you know, the last thing I'll say is, you know, if you're on the fence about taking a workshop and you'd like to hear a testimonial from someone who has been in a workshop with me, definitely flip through these few testimonials that I acquired from some of the students I've gotten to work with. So, and then all of the images in the background are taken from workshops that I've taught. So everything here is real and legit and not AI generated. So if you have any questions that you can't find answers to on this page, let me know, and I'm always happy to chat. Okay, I think that's it. Jane, if you're still here, thank you so much for tuning in. It was the highlight of my night. I hope to see you in future chats in the future and in person at some point, maybe this summer at an event. So that'll be fun to reconnect this year. To anyone else who's watching this video down the road, or you know, whenever this is published, thank you again for watching, and I'll see you at some point in another video. So that's all I have for tonight. Again, my name is Hector Acuna. This is my link to my website, and that's it. Okay, I'm going to end it there. Have a great night, Jane, and take care. Maybe I'll see you again on a stream sometime soon. Okay,